My name is Aldrich. I am 35 years old. I have lived my entire life on Draconis Prime, a night world ruled by House Draconis, and only now do I understand the truth of my existence. I am property. I have always been property. I will die as property. And my sons will inherit that status, generation after generation, until the bloodline ends, or the world does. This is not hyperbole. This is not bitterness speaking. This is the literal, legal reality of life on a night world, written into charters older than my family line, enforced by tradition that predates the Imperium itself. I was born in the village of Fellhaven, one of 17 settlements that exist solely to support Lord Castor Draconis and his knight, the Adamant Wrath. My father was a field worker. His father before him was a field worker. I am a field worker. My sons will be field workers. We grow crops, grains and root vegetables that can survive in Draconis Prime's harsh climate. We tend livestock, hardy beasts, bred for meat and labor. We maintain the irrigation systems that make agriculture possible on this rocky, unforgiving world. Everything we produce belongs to House Draconis. Everything. At harvest time, house retainers come to take the Lord's portion. This isn't a tax. It's not a percentage of our yield. It's whatever they decide the Lord requires. Some years they take half, some years they take more. What's left is distributed among the village according to contribution and need, as determined by the village elder, who serves at the Lord's pleasure, and can be replaced at any moment if the noble finds him unsatisfactory. We are serfs. The word isn't used often. The Imperium prefers terms like bonded workers or hereditary servants. But the reality is medieval feudalism, preserved deliberately, enforced absolutely. I didn't understand this as a child. Children rarely question the world they're born into. This was simply how life worked. The nobles lived in their fortress monastery, piloted their mighty knights, protected us from threats beyond the sky. We worked the land, provided for their needs, and in return received protection and purpose. It seemed fair. It seemed right. It seemed like the natural order. I was wrong. My earliest memory is of seeing a knight for the first time. I was 4 years old. Lord Castor had returned from a campaign against orcs in the neighboring system, victorious, his knight bearing fresh kill markings on its armor plating. The entire village was summoned to witness his triumphal return, to see the glory of House Draconis, to understand why our service mattered. We gathered in the village square as the Adamant Wrath approached. The ground shook with each step. The knight towered over everything. 15 meters of adamantium and ceramite, bristling with weapons, covered in heraldry and purity seals. It was magnificent, terrifying, godlike. Lord Castor's voice boomed from the knight's external voxcasters, amplified to reach every villager. People of Fellhaven, your service has sustained House Draconis through another victorious campaign. The crops you grew fed my household. The livestock you tended provided for my retinue. Your labor made this victory possible. We cheered. We actually cheered, because we'd been told our entire lives that this was our purpose, to enable the nobles to fight, to give them the foundation they needed to protect the world. We felt pride in our contribution, validation that our backbreaking labor meant something. The Emperor watches over the faithful, Lord Castor continued, and you are faithful. Continue your service, continue your labor. Know that House Draconis values your devotion. More cheering. My father lifted me onto his shoulders so I could see better. I stared at the knight in awe, my child's mind unable to comprehend the engineering required to create such a machine, only understanding that it was powerful and beautiful and piloted by someone far greater than I could ever be. I wanted to be a knight pilot when I grew up. Every child did. We didn't understand that it was impossible, that only those born into noble families could ever interface with a knight's throne mechanicum, that genetic compatibility was required, bloodlines carefully maintained over millennia. We were commoners. We could no more pilot a night than we could fly to the stars. But I didn't know that yet. I just saw glory and wanted to be part of it. I learned the truth gradually, piece by piece, year by year. At 8 years old, I began working the fields with the other children. Not full days, we were still too small for that, but hours, every morning, before whatever education the village could provide. We learned to plant, to harvest, to maintain the irrigation channels, to recognize crop diseases. This was normal, expected. All children worked. It was how they learned their place, their purpose, their contribution to the village and to House Draconis. At 10, I asked the village teacher why we didn't have machines to help with farming. I'd seen pictures in old books, tractors, harvesters, automated systems that could do the work of dozens of people. Why were we doing everything by hand when technology existed to make it easier? The teacher looked uncomfortable. "Such things are not for us," he said carefully. "The Mechanicum maintains the knights and the critical systems. Agriculture is our domain, done in the traditional manner as it has always been." "But why?" I pressed. "If we had machines, we could produce more food with less labor. We could have time for other things. We could—" "Enough," the teacher interrupted, his tone sharp. "You question the order established by House Draconis and blessed by the Mechanicum. Such questions lead to discontent. Discontent leads to sedition. You will not speak of this again." I didn't understand why asking about efficiency was seditious, but I learned to stop asking questions where others could hear. 11. At 12, I watched as Lord Castor's retainers came to select young men for household service. They walked through the village, examining boys and young men, choosing those who seemed strong, healthy, obedient. 10 were selected from Fellhaven that year. One was my friend, Brennan. He was thrilled. Household service was considered an honor, a step above fieldwork, a chance to serve the Lord directly. We celebrated with him, envied him his good fortune. He returned to visit 6 months later. He changed, lost weight, moved stiffly, like his body hurt. His eyes were distant, empty. He wouldn't talk about his service, just said it was difficult but necessary, and that he was honored to serve. Then he left, walking back toward the fortress monastery with the mechanical gait of someone who'd learned to obey without thinking. I never saw him again. I heard later he'd been killed during a training accident, crushed by a piece of knight armor being moved into position. An unfortunate mishap, regrettable, inevitable in work that involved machinery weighing hundreds of tons. No compensation for his family, no acknowledgement beyond a brief mention during the next village assembly. Just gone, his life ended in service to a lord who probably never learned his name. At 15, I started asking why we couldn't leave. Not abandon our duties, I wasn't that naive, but simply travel, see other villages, visit the capital city where House Draconis maintained their primary fortress, learn about the wider world. Travel requires Lord's permission, my father explained. And permission is rarely granted. We are needed here, our work is here. Leaving would disrupt the service we provide. What if someone just left anyway? My father's face went hard. That would be desertion. Abandonment of sworn duty. Punishable by death if caught. And they would be caught. House retainers patrol all roads, monitor all transportation. There's nowhere to go on Draconis Prime that isn't under house control. What about off-world? Could someone... Off-world travel is restricted to nobles and their authorized representatives, he interrupted. Commoners don't leave night worlds. Ever. This has been. I was beginning to understand. We weren't just workers, we were prisoners. The entire planet was a prison, disguised as a feudal paradise, maintained by tradition and force. Comment feudal prison if you're seeing the horror here. At 17, I witnessed an execution. Man from the neighboring village had been caught stealing food from house stores. Not much, a sack of grain, enough to feed his family for a week. But it was house property, taken without permission, and that was theft. All the villages in Lord Castor's domain were summoned to witness justice. We gathered in the great square before the fortress monastery's outer walls, thousands of us, forced to watch as the thief was brought forward in chains. Lord Castor himself presided, his knight standing behind him, a silent reminder of the power that enforced his judgments. He spoke of duty, of honor, of the sacred contract between noble and commoner. The noble provided protection, the commoner provided service. To steal was to violate that contract, to betray the trust that held society together. The thief was given a chance to speak. He explained that his family was starving, that the harvest had been poor and the Lord's portion had taken nearly everything, that his children were dying and he'd acted out of desperation. Lord Castor listened patiently. Then he pronounced sentence. Death by hanging, to be carried out immediately, as a reminder that honor and duty superseded all personal concerns. The man was hanged. We watched. His family watched. His children watched their father die for the crime of trying to keep them alive. Afterward, Lord Castor addressed us again. Let this serve as a reminder that House Draconis maintains order through strength tempered by justice. All who serve faithfully have nothing to fear. All who betray their oaths will face the Emperor's judgment. We were dismissed. We returned to our villages in silence, and I realized that justice on a night world meant something very different from what I'd been taught to believe. Justice meant maintaining the system, protecting noble privilege, ensuring that commoners remained compliant, obedient, too afraid to question the order that ground them into dust. I married at 20. His name was Torin, son of the village blacksmith, a good man who understood metalwork and maintenance, who could repair tools and fashion new ones from scrap. We had no ceremony requiring Lord's permission. Commoner marriages were village affairs blessed by the local priest, recorded in village records. The Lord didn't care who married whom, as long as the work got done and the children who resulted would grow into productive laborers. We built a small house on the village outskirts. 2 rooms, one for living, one for sleeping. Thatched roof, dirt floor, no running water, no electricity, no amenities beyond what we could construct ourselves from available materials. This was normal. This was what commoners had. The nobles lived in the fortress monastery with its climate control and advanced technology. We lived in medieval hovels because that was considered appropriate to our station. Torin and I worked hard. He maintained tools for the village. I worked the fields. We scraped together enough to survive, season to season, harvest to harvest. It wasn't a good life, but it was life, and we were grateful for it, because we'd been taught that gratitude was appropriate, that wanting more was greed, that accepting your place was virtue. Our first son was born when I was 22. We named him Davin. He was healthy, strong, perfect. We celebrated his birth with what little we had, grateful that he'd survived. Infant mortality on Draconis Prime was high, medical care limited to what the village herbalist could provide. Looking at Davin, holding him in my arms, I felt joy mixed with something darker. This child would grow up as I had, would work fields as I did, would live in poverty and call it normal, would serve House Draconis until his death, generation after generation of service, without end or advancement or hope. And there was nothing I could do to change it. His future was determined by his birth. He was born common, he would die common. The system that imprisoned me would imprison him and his children forever. That's when I started to hate. Not the nobles directly. They were doing what they'd been raised to do, maintaining the order they'd inherited. But the system itself. The deliberate, calculated structure that kept billions of humans in medieval squalor while technology to liberate them existed and was deliberately withheld. I hated it, and I could do nothing about it except endure and teach my son to endure after me. At 25, I was conscripted into Lord Castor's retinue for a campaign. Orc raiders had been spotted in the system's outer reaches. House Draconis was mobilizing to intercept them before they reached the planet. Lord Castor required additional personnel, not to fight directly, but to support his knights' operations. Maintenance crews, supply carriers, camp laborers. Meat shields, in other words. Bodies to throw at problems while the knight did the actual fighting. 30 men from Fellhaven were selected. I was among them. So was my brother, Gareth. We had no choice in the matter. When the Lord's retainers called your name, you reported immediately, or were dragged there by force. We were given minimal equipment, rough uniforms, basic tools, rations that were somehow worse than what we ate in the village. No weapons. Commoners weren't trusted with weapons. No armor. That was for soldiers, not laborers. We marched for 3 days to reach the staging area where Lord Castor's knight and several others from House Draconis were preparing for deployment. Hundreds of commoners had been gathered from villages across the Lord's domain, all of us conscripted for service, all of us expendable. The knights were magnificent up close. 5 of them, towering war machines bristling with weapons, covered in heraldry that told the history of House Draconis' victories. Their pilots stood nearby, nobles in ornate armor, discussing strategy, planning the campaign. We commoners stood in formation, waiting for orders, trying not to draw attention. Drawing attention was dangerous. It meant being noticed. Being noticed meant being given the worst assignments. A house officer addressed us. Not a noble. He was high-born, but not of the piloting families, one of the lesser aristocracy who handled logistics and command. His contempt was obvious. You are here to serve, he said, his voice sharp. You will maintain knight systems when required. You will carry supplies. You will establish camps. You will do whatever task is assigned without hesitation or complaint. Failure will be punished. Cowardice will be executed. You exist to enable our nobles to fight effectively. Remember that. Welcome. We were divided into work crews and assigned to specific knights. I ended up assigned to the Adamant Wrath, Lord Castor's knight, the same one I'd watched in awe as a child. The irony wasn't lost on me. The campaign lasted 6 weeks. Those were the longest, most terrifying 6 weeks of my life. We traveled in transports, massive cargo haulers that could carry knights and their support personnel. The journey to the intercept point took days. We slept in cramped compartments, ate minimal rations, and tried not to think about what was coming. When we reached the orcs, the battle was swift and brutal. The knights deployed, stomping across the barren moon where the orcs had established their forward base. We commoners were kept back, watching from behind defensive positions, our role to wait until the fighting was done and then move in to salvage and maintain. The orcs never had a chance. 5 Imperial knights against 100 orcs. The Xenos died in droves, cut down by Gatling cannons and thermal lances, crushed beneath knight feet, incinerated by plasma weapons. It was magnificent and horrifying simultaneously. And then one of the orcs got lucky. A looted rocket launcher, fired from concealment, struck Lord Castor's knight in the leg joint. The explosion damaged the actuator, and the Adamant Wrath stumbled, nearly falling. That's when we were sent in. Not to fight. We had no weapons. But to repair the knight while it was still in combat. To restore function before the orcs could exploit the vulnerability. 20 of us ran across open ground, under fire, carrying tools and replacement parts, racing to reach the wounded knight. Orc bullets tore through our ranks. Men fell around me, screaming, dying, but we kept running because stopping meant being shot by the orcs or executed for cowardice by house retainers. We reached the knight, climbed its leg using maintenance rungs, started working on the damaged actuator, while Lord Castor above us continued fighting, the knight's weapons thundering, spent casings raining down around us. I don't remember the repair clearly, just fragments. Hands slick with oil and blood, the roar of weapons fire, someone next to me taking a bullet through the throat and falling off the knight's leg, tools slipping in my desperate grip. Somehow we got it done. The actuator was functional enough, the knight could walk. Lord Castor advanced, continuing his slaughter, and we climbed down and ran back to safety. Of the 20 who'd run out, 11 returned. 9 were dead. Their bodies were left on the battlefield, considered acceptable losses, not worth the time to recover. No one thanked us. No one acknowledged what we'd done. We'd performed our function. That was sufficient. Subscribe if this is making you angry. That anger is justified. During the campaign, I saw how the nobles actually viewed us. One evening, I was performing maintenance on the Adamant Wrath's leg assembly. Lord Castor was nearby speaking with another noble. I was beneath their notice. Commoners were functionally invisible to nobles unless directly needed, so they spoke freely. The conscripts performed adequately during the battle, Lord Castor said. Lost fewer than expected. What was the casualty rate? The other noble asked. Approximately 30%, acceptable for the tasks required. 30%. He was discussing the deaths of dozens of men as a percentage. A statistic. Acceptable losses in the maintenance of his knight. Will you request more from your villages? The other noble continued. If necessary, Fellhaven and the surrounding settlements can provide another 100 laborers without significantly impacting agricultural output. The population replenishes adequately. The population replenishes adequately. He was talking about us breeding, about producing children to replace the ones he'd spent during his campaigns. We were livestock to him, self-replenishing resources to be expended as needed. The feudal system works well, the other noble observed. Keeps them compliant, productive, grateful for their place. The Mechanicum was wise to maintain these arrangements. Indeed. Imagine trying to manage billions of commoners with modern expectations, demands for rights, compensation, advancement. Impossible. Better they remain simple, focused on service, content with their traditional roles. They moved away, continuing their conversation, never knowing I'd heard. Never caring if I had. What would a commoner do with such knowledge? Complain? To whom? The system was absolute. I continued my maintenance work, hands shaking, mind racing. It was intentional. The medieval conditions, the lack of technology, the feudal structure, all of it was deliberate. We were kept ignorant and powerless because educated, empowered commoners would demand change, would question why billions lived in squalor while nobles lived in luxury, would refuse to accept their place in a hierarchy that existed solely to benefit those at the top. We were prisoners by design, and the system was maintained by the Mechanicum, blessed by the Imperium, enforced by tradition, older than anyone living. There was no escape, no hope of change. Just generation after generation of service, forever. My brother Gareth died during that campaign. Not in battle. After. We were breaking down camp, loading equipment onto the transports for the return journey. A piece of knight armor, a shoulder plate weighing several tons, was being moved by a crane system. The rigging failed. The plate fell. Gareth was underneath. He died instantly, crushed so thoroughly there was barely anything to recover. The house officer in charge noted the incident in his records. One laborer killed in equipment accident. Cause, structural failure of transport rigging. Action, rigging to be inspected and replaced. Laborer's family to be notified. That was it. That was all my brother's life was worth. A note in a logbook, an order to fix the rigging, notification to be sent. I was standing right there when it happened. I saw him die. Saw his body, what was left of it, scraped out from under the armor plate and wrapped in canvas. Saw it loaded onto the transport with the other casualties, commoners who died during the campaign, all of us expendable, all of us forgotten. I wanted to rage, to scream, to attack the officer who'd noted my brother's death with such clinical detachment. But I did nothing, because raging would get me executed. Attacking an officer would get me executed. Showing any response beyond silent acceptance would mark me as unstable, potentially seditious, worthy of punishment. So I swallowed my grief and my rage, and I went back to work, because that's what commoners did. We endured, we served, we died, and we never, ever complained. When we returned to Fellhaven, I had to tell Gareth's husband about his death. He'd been working the fields, expecting his partner to return within the week. Instead, I returned alone, carrying the canvas-wrapped remains, delivering the house's official notification that Gareth had died honorably in service to House Draconis, his sacrifice noted and appreciated. He collapsed, actually collapsed, falling to his knees in the dirt, making sounds I'd never heard from a human throat. Grief so total it bypassed language, became pure animal keening. I stood there uselessly, holding what was left of my brother, unable to offer comfort because there was no comfort to give. Gareth was gone. His death had been meaningless, preventable, the result of poor maintenance and cheaper rigging. But there would be no accountability, no compensation beyond the official notification, no justice. Just another commoner, dead in service, just another percentage in Lord Caster's acceptable losses. We buried Gareth in the village cemetery, a plot of rocky ground where generations of commoners had been interred. The priest said the appropriate words. We mourned in the traditional way. And then we returned to work, because there was always work, always service required, always fields to tend and quotas to meet. Life continued, as if Gareth had never existed, as if his death mattered no more than a broken tool that had been replaced. That's when I truly understood. We didn't matter, not individually, not as people. We mattered only as a collective, as a resource, as the foundation that enabled noble power. As long as the population remained adequate, individual deaths were irrelevant. We were expendable. We had always been expendable. And the system that made us expendable would never change, because the people with the power to change it benefited from it remaining exactly as it was. At 28, I tried to educate myself. This wasn't easy on a night world. Books were rare. Paper was expensive. Production limited, distribution controlled by House Draconis. The village had a small collection, religious texts approved by the ecclesiarchy, technical manuals for basic agriculture and maintenance, historical records of House Draconis's glorious campaigns, nothing that would teach me about technology, nothing about other worlds, other systems, how the Imperium actually functioned, nothing that might make me question my place or understand the mechanisms keeping me there. But I found things. Scraps. Old technical manuals that had been discarded from the fortress monastery, salvaged by commoners who couldn't read them but kept them because paper was valuable. Fragments of Imperial records from supply shipments, this water-damaged cogitator instruction manual that some tech priest had thrown away decades ago. I taught myself to read High Gothic, poorly, but enough to understand technical passages. I studied the manuals, learning about machines and systems that existed, but which we were never allowed to use. I pieced together information about the wider Imperium, about other worlds where people lived differently, with technology and opportunities we'd never have. And I learned about the Mechanicum's role in maintaining night worlds. The Adeptus Mechanicus had a vested interest in preserving knight houses. The knights themselves were ancient technology, dating back to humanity's first expansion into the stars, their construction secrets known only to specific forge worlds. Each knight world was a living museum, a preservation of old alliances between knight houses and the Mechanicum. To maintain those alliances, the Mechanicum enforced strict technological controls on knight worlds. Commoner populations were kept at medieval tech levels. No education, no machinery, no advancement. This ensured they remained dependent on the nobles and the Mechanicum, unable to threaten the existing power structure. It was policy. Written into agreements thousands of years old, the Mechanicum maintained the knights, the knight houses maintained feudal control, the commoners remained powerless. Everyone benefited except the commoners, and the commoners had no voice in the arrangement. We were medieval by design, not by necessity. The technology to improve our lives existed, it just wasn't deployed because educated, empowered commoners might question why they needed nobles at all. Share this if you think anyone should know this truth. At 30, there was an incident that almost destroyed me. Lord Castor required household servants. His primary estate needed additional staff, personal attendants for his family, maintenance workers for the private quarters, laborers for the extensive gardens that surrounded the noble residences. The house retainers came to Fellhaven to select candidates. They examined young men from the village, looking for those who were healthy, strong, obedient-looking. 10 were chosen. One was my son, Davin. He was 8 years old. I tried to object, stood before the retainers and explained that Davin was too young, that he was needed in the village, that his mother needed him, that surely there were others who could serve. The lead retainer looked at me with cold eyes. "Are you refusing the Lord's selection?" That question was a trap. Refusing meant sedition. Sedition meant punishment. Potentially death, certainly exile from the village, possibly imprisonment, and it wouldn't save Davin. They'd take him anyway, and I'd have suffered for nothing. "No," I said, the word ash in my mouth. He's young. He'll grow. Household service is an honor. Your son will serve Lord Castor directly, within the fortress, monastery, elevated above common field work. You should be grateful. Grateful. That word again. We were supposed to be grateful when they took our labor, our crops, our lives, our children. Grateful for every indignity, every exploitation, every abuse. Gratitude was mandatory. Anything else was sedition. They took Davin. He looked back at me as they led him away, confused, scared, too young to understand what was happening. I wanted to run after him, to tear him from their hands, to flee with him into the wilderness where house retainers couldn't reach us. I did nothing, because there was nothing I could do. The system was absolute. The power differential was complete. I was a commoner. They were the Lord's representatives. My wants, my needs, my love for my son, none of it mattered compared to the Lord's requirements. Torin wept for days. I couldn't weep. I was too angry, too broken. I'd failed to protect my son from the system that would grind him down, just as it had ground down my father, my brother, me. Davin was allowed to visit once, 6 months later. He'd changed, thinner, quieter. He moved carefully, like he'd learned that sudden movements drew attention, and attention brought punishment. He wouldn't talk about his service in detail, just said he was learning his duties and that he was honored to serve. He was 8 years old and already broken, already molded into the perfect servant, already taught that his value existed only in his utility to the nobles who owned him. I never forgave myself for letting them take him, even though I'd had no choice, even though resistance would have been futile. I'd failed as a father, as a man, as a human being. The system had taken my son and I'd stood by and watched it happen. At 32, I witnessed an attempted escape. A young man from a neighboring village, Corvin, barely 20, had tried to flee the planet. Somehow he'd made it to the capital city, had attempted to stow away on a cargo transport heading off-world. He'd been caught, of course. House security monitored all spaceport activity. Commoners couldn't move through those areas without being noticed. He was returned to his home village for punishment. All surrounding villages were summoned to witness justice. Hundreds of us, gathered in the square, forced to watch as an example was made. Lord Castor presided again. His knight stood behind him, silent and terrible. Corvin was brought forward in chains, beaten and exhausted, barely able to stand. "This man attempted desertion," Lord Castor announced. "He abandoned his sworn duties. He rejected the station the Emperor assigned him. He sought to flee from service, from honor, from the responsibilities that define him as a man." Corvin was given a chance to speak. He lifted his head, eyes defiant despite his broken body. "I wanted to be free," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "I wanted to see if there was more to existence than serving people who see me as livestock. I wanted to find out if the Imperium offers anything beyond this prison we're born into." Silence. No one spoke. We all thought those things, but no one ever said them aloud. Corvin had broken the fundamental rule: never question the system. Never voice the doubts we all harbored. Lord Castor's expression didn't change. Freedom is found in service. Purpose is found in duty. You rejected both, and in doing so, rejected the Emperor's plan for your life. There is no greater heresy than abandoning one's proper place in the God Emperor's design. He pronounced sentence. Death by hanging, same as the thief years before. Same as anyone who violated the social order. Same as everyone who ever tried to escape or resist or demand anything more than what the nobles chose to give. Corvin was hanged. He didn't beg or plead. He died with dignity, maintaining his defiance, even at the end. His last words were, "I regret nothing." We were dismissed. We returned to our villages, and I realized that Corvin was the bravest man I'd ever known. He'd tried. He'd failed and he'd paid the price, but he'd tried to escape the system that imprisoned us all. He'd been more courageous than I would ever be. 33, there was an invasion. Orcs, not raiders this time, a full YHW, tens of thousands of greenskins descending on Draconis Prime, intent on conquest and slaughter. House Draconis mobilized completely. Every knight they possessed took to the field. Every capable commoner was conscripted to support operations. Our village, all 17 villages in Lord Castor's domain, was evacuated to a defensive position near where the knights would make their stand. Officially, this was for our protection. In reality, it was strategic. Our presence guaranteed the knights would fight there, defending the position where their labor force was concentrated. And if the orcs attacked us directly, we'd slow them down, giving the knights time to maneuver. We were bait, and everyone knew it. Thousands of us huddled behind hastily erected barricades, while the knights took position between us and the approaching orc horde. We could see them coming, a green tide flowing across the plains, screaming and firing weapons, driving ramshackle vehicles, accompanied by enormous walkers that stomped toward us with terrifying speed. The knights engaged. The battle was apocalyptic. 15 Imperial knights against thousands of orcs. The odds should have been impossible, but knights were built for this kind of warfare. Their weapons carved through orc formations, each shot killing dozens, their armor shrugging off return fire that would have destroyed conventional vehicles. But the orcs kept coming, and some got through. A mob of orcs broke past the knight line, charging directly at our defensive position. Hundreds of them, howling for blood, firing crude weapons, waving axes and cleavers. We had no weapons, no armor, nothing but the barricades and each other. The orcs crashed into us like a wave of green death. I remember fragments, A friend's head split by an orc axe, crushing an orc's skull with a rock because I had nothing else. Blood everywhere, green and red mixing in the dirt, screaming that went on forever. The smell of burning flesh as a knight's flamer swept across the mob, killing orcs and commoners indiscriminately. The knights drove the orcs back eventually. The invasion was repelled. House Draconis was victorious. The world was saved. Half our village was dead. Like and subscribe if you think this is wrong, if these people deserve better. The survivors gathered in the ruins of our defensive position. Bodies everywhere. Commoners and orcs both, piled together, indistinguishable in death. The smell was unbearable. Lord Cast addressed us from his night, his voice amplified, echoing across the battlefield. People of Fellhaven and the surrounding villages, today you witnessed the might of House Draconis. Today you saw why your service matters. Your presence here ensured we knew where to defend. Your sacrifice slowed the enemy's advance. You should be proud of your contribution to this victory. Contribution. He called our deaths a contribution. Hundreds of commoners killed because we'd been deliberately placed in harm's way, and he was framing it as noble sacrifice rather than what it was, a tactical decision to use our bodies as obstacles. House Draconis thanks you for your faithful service. Return to your villages, rebuild, continue your labor. Know that the Emperor watches over those who serve. We were dismissed. We gathered our dead, those we could identify, and began the long walk back to Fellhaven. Half the village was gone, families destroyed, an entire generation reduced by half in a single afternoon. And we were supposed to be grateful. Grateful we'd survived, grateful we'd had the honor of serving, grateful that House Draconis had protected us, even though they deliberately put us in danger to serve their strategic purposes. I walked back to Fellhaven in silence, covered in blood and ash, understanding with absolute clarity that this would happen again, that our children would die in future battles, used the same way we'd been used, that the system would grind through generation after generation forever, and nothing would ever change. We were slaves to the knights. We had always been slaves. We would always be slaves. And there was no escape except death. At 34, I started seeing the mechanisms of control more clearly. It wasn't just the knights and the threat of violence. Those were the obvious tools. But the system was maintained by subtler means, psychological, social, cultural mechanisms that made resistance almost impossible, even if you understood you were being oppressed. The ecclesiarchy played a crucial role. Every village had a priest assigned by House Draconis who preached the Imperial Creed with a feudal interpretation. We were taught that the Emperor had ordained the social hierarchy, that our station was divinely assigned, that questioning our place was not just sedition, but heresy. The Emperor, in his wisdom, has given each person their proper role, Father Mikhail preached during services. The nobles pilot knights and protect the realm. The commoners till the earth and provide sustenance. Each serves according to their capacity, and all service is equally valuable in the Emperor's eyes. Equally valuable. Yet nobles lived in fortresses with technology and comfort, while we lived in dirt-floor hovels and died in our 30s from overwork and disease. That equality was a lie, but it was a lie we were supposed to accept, supposed to believe, supposed to internalize so completely that questioning it felt like betraying the Emperor himself. The sermons reinforced this constantly. Service was virtue, suffering was purification. Accepting your place was holy. The only sin was pride. Wanting more than you'd been given, aspiring beyond your station, questioning the order that sustained civilization. I used to believe it. When you're raised with this messaging from birth, when everyone around you accepts it, when the alternative is being branded a heretic, it's easier to believe than to question. Your mind naturally seeks consistency, and rejecting the ecclesiarchy's teachings meant admitting your entire life had been built on lies. Most people couldn't face that. I could barely face it myself. The village social structure reinforced compliance too. We had an elder, Oldus, a man in his 50s, ancient by commoner standards. He'd been appointed by Lord Caster to manage village affairs, to distribute the Lord's commands, to mediate disputes. He had no real authority. He served at the Lord's pleasure and could be replaced instantly. But within the village, he was the voice of House Draconis. Oldus was not a cruel man. He was simply pragmatic. He understood that the system was absolute and that survival meant compliance. So he enforced the Lord's will, distributed the Lord's portions, selected men for conscription, and maintained order through a combination of tradition and implied threat. Anyone who questioned too loudly would find themselves called before Aldous for a conversation. These weren't official proceedings, just informal discussions, where Aldous would remind you of your duties, of the consequences of sedition, of how much worse things could be if you drew house attention. "You're a smart man, Aldrich," he told me once, after I'd made some comment about the unfairness of the harvest portions. "Smart enough to know that complaining changes nothing. Smart enough to understand that House Draconis doesn't tolerate sedition. Smart enough to keep your thoughts private before they get you killed." It was a threat wrapped in fatherly concern. Stop talking. Stop thinking. Stop questioning. Accept your place or face consequences. Most people did. I did too, publicly. But privately, in my mind, the questions kept growing. Even our limited education was a tool of control. Village children received basic schooling, reading and writing at an elementary level, basic mathematics for measuring and calculating, religious instruction. Nothing more. Nothing that would let them understand the technology around them or question the systems controlling them, or imagine different ways of organizing society. I'd asked the teacher once why we didn't teach more advanced subjects. Engineering, for instance, or history beyond House Draconis' glorious victories. "Such knowledge is unnecessary for your duties," he'd replied. "You need to plant crops, maintain simple tools, read the Emperor's holy texts. Advanced education would only confuse you, give you ideas inappropriate to your station." Ideas inappropriate to your station. The truth spoken plainly. Education was dangerous. Knowledge was power. If commoners understood how things actually worked, they might start asking why they had no control over their own lives. Better to keep them ignorant, focused on immediate tasks, incapable of conceptualizing alternatives. The Mechanicum supported this policy. Tech priests occasionally visited to maintain the knights and critical infrastructure, but they never shared knowledge with commoners. We weren't allowed to understand the machines that dominated our world. We just accepted them as divine mysteries, maintained by priests of the machine god, forever beyond our comprehension. Ignorance was policy, enforced systematically, maintained across generations. Because educated peasants were dangerous, and the system depended on keeping us in our place. At 35, I had a conversation that changed everything. A man had arrived in the village, a stranger, which was itself unusual. Travel between villages was restricted, strangers were immediately noticed, and anyone unknown was reported to house retainers within hours. This man was different. He moved like he belonged, worked alongside us in the fields without drawing attention, spoke the local dialect perfectly. He'd somehow avoided official notice for weeks. I encountered him while working an irrigation channel, and we started talking. Casual conversation at first, weather, crops, the usual complaints about quotas. But then he said something that made me stop. "It's deliberate, you know, all of this. The poverty, the feudalism, the control. The Imperium could change it. They choose not to." I looked at him carefully. "That's sedition, dangerous talk. Only if someone reports it." "Are you going to report me?" I should have. The proper thing, The safe thing was to report seditious speech immediately. But I was tired of being proper, tired of being safe, tired of pretending I didn't think exactly what he was saying. "No," I said quietly. He smiled slightly. "Good. Because you need to understand something, Eldrick. This world, all night worlds, they're reservations, museums. The Mechanicum maintains them to preserve night houses, and night houses are useful to the Imperium. So they keep you medieval, keep you compliant, keep you breeding the next generation of servants. How do you know my name? I've been watching, listening. You're one of the few who questions, who sees what's being done to you. That's rare. Most people are so indoctrinated, they can't see the prison bars. Who are you? Someone who escaped a night world decades ago. I got off world, saw other places, learned how the Imperium actually works. And now I come back sometimes to tell people the truth, to help them understand they're prisoners by design. This was insane, dangerous. If anyone overheard us, we'd both be executed. Why? What's the point of telling me this? Because you deserve to know. Because someone should acknowledge what's being done to you. Because maybe, someday, knowing the truth will matter. It won't change anything, I said bitterly. The system is absolute. Maybe. But you'll die knowing you weren't crazy, that your instincts were right, that you saw the truth when everyone else accepted the lies. He left the next day, disappeared as mysteriously as he'd arrived. I never learned his name or whether what he'd told me was true. But it didn't matter. He'd confirmed what I'd already suspected, what I'd been piecing together for years. We were prisoners, deliberately kept medieval, deliberately kept ignorant, deliberately exploited for the benefit of people who saw us as livestock. And there was nothing we could do about it except endure and watch our children inherit the same chains. Comment truth if this is the reality you see. At 35, I stand in the fields, looking at the fortress monastery in the distance, and I understand my life completely. I will never leave this world. I will never own land. I will never have rights or agency or control over my existence. I will work until my body fails, producing crops for nobles who consider me livestock, serving people who see my death as an acceptable statistic. My son, Davin, is gone, absorbed into household service, transformed into the perfect servant. I will likely never have a real conversation with him again. He's been taught that his father is common, crude, irrelevant to his new elevated status within the fortress monastery. My husband, Torin, works beside me, his hands gnarled from decades of labor, his body breaking down at 33. He'll be dead within years. The average life expectancy for male commoners on Draconis Prime is 38. I'll probably follow soon after. We'll be buried in the village cemetery, forgotten within a generation, our lives reduced to nothing more than the labor we provided. Our second son, born after Davin was taken, will grow up in the same system. He'll work the same fields. He'll serve the same lords. He'll die young, having never known anything but this prison we call civilization. And his sons will do the same. Forever. Until the bloodline ends, or the world does. This is what I've realized at 35. It's intentional. Every aspect of this system is deliberately designed to maintain itself across generations. The Mechanicum preserves night worlds as feudal reservations because night houses are militarily useful. The Imperium tolerates it because night worlds produce knights, and knights are valuable assets. The nobles maintain it because they benefit from absolute power and unquestioned authority. And we commoners exist to support it all, generation after generation, deliberately kept medieval, deliberately kept ignorant, deliberately kept powerless. There's no malice in it, not directly. The nobles aren't cackling villains who enjoy our suffering. They're simply doing what they were raised to do, maintaining the system they inherited, believing genuinely that this is the proper order of things. But the lack of malice doesn't make it less oppressive. It makes it worse in some ways. At least a villain could be fought. This is just structure, system, the way things are and have always been and will always be. And there's no escape. Nowhere to run, nothing to fight. Just the slow grinding of generations into dust, forever. I tried to share what I'd learned with others, carefully, quietly, testing who might understand, who might see what I saw. Most people rejected it. They couldn't face the implications. Accepting that the system was deliberately oppressive meant accepting that their suffering was intentional, that the nobles they'd been taught to revere saw them as livestock, that the emperor's divine plan was actually just structural violence dressed in religious language. That was too much, too overwhelming, easier to believe the comfortable lies. That service was honorable, that suffering was purifying, that their station was divinely ordained. A few understood. Torin did, eventually. We talked late at night, our voices low, speaking truths we'd never voice publicly. He'd seen his own father die at 37, his brother taken for household service and never seen again. He understood on some level that something was deeply wrong. But understanding didn't change anything. We still worked the fields, still met the quotas, still bowed when house retainers passed. Because what else could we do? Rebellion was suicide. Resistance was futile. The power differential was absolute. So what's the point? Torin asked one night. If nothing can change, if we're trapped forever, what's the point of even knowing? I didn't have an answer then. I'm not sure I have one now. Maybe there is no point. Maybe awareness of your prison just makes the imprisonment more painful. Or maybe it matters simply to know, to refuse to accept the lies, to understand that your suffering isn't natural or necessary or ordained. It's chosen, deliberately maintained, enforced for the benefit of others. Maybe dying with that knowledge is better than dying believing the comfortable fictions. Maybe. Davin visited once more when he was 10. He'd been in household service for 2 years. He'd changed even more, moved with careful precision, spoke in the formal dialect used in the fortress monastery, addressed me as father with the distant respect reserved for social inferiors. He was wearing household livery, simple but clean, better quality than anything we commoners could afford. He looked healthy, well-fed, better off materially than he'd ever been in the village, and completely broken psychologically, molded into the perfect servant, taught to see his position as privileged, his service as honorable. Household service is wonderful, he told us, the words sounding rehearsed. Lord Castor's family is kind. I'm learning so much. I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve so closely. Grateful, that word again. He'd been taught gratitude for his exploitation, gratitude for being taken from his family, gratitude for being transformed into something useful to people who saw him as a tool. I wanted to tell him the truth, that he'd been stolen, that the nobles were using him, that he deserved better than spending his life serving people who would never see him as fully human. But I couldn't. He'd been too thoroughly indoctrinated. He'd report me for sedition. He'd believe he was doing the right thing, protecting the social order, stopping his father from spreading dangerous ideas. So I said nothing, just told him I was proud, that he should serve faithfully, that we'd always love him, even if we couldn't see him often. He left the next day, returning to the fortress monastery, to his new life. I watched him go, understanding that I'd lost my son completely. Not to death, that would have been easier, but to the system that had reprogrammed him into compliance, that had taught him to love his chains, that had convinced him his servitude was privilege. That was perhaps the cruelest thing the system did. It didn't just exploit us. It made us complicit in our own exploitation, made us grateful for scraps, made us see our imprisonment as protection, made us teach our children to accept their place without question. It was self-perpetuating, self-maintaining, perfect in its efficiency. Subscribe if you think this system is evil, if these people deserve freedom. 35. I know I will die here, in these fields, serving these lords, without ever having owned land or chosen my own path or experienced freedom in any meaningful sense. I know my sons will inherit this fate, and their sons, forever, or until House Draconis falls, or until the Mechanicum changes its policies, or until the Imperium collapses. None of which will happen in my lifetime, or my sons' lifetimes, or their sons' lifetimes. I live on a night world. I am a commoner in a feudal system maintained by the most powerful institution in the galaxy. I have no rights, no agency, no hope of advancement or escape. I exist to serve knights, to die for their glory, to breed the next generation of servants, nothing more. This is my life. This is my reality. This is the truth they try so hard to keep us from understanding. And now you know it too. You understand what life is really like on a night world, beneath the propaganda about noble houses and glorious knights. You understand that for every knight striding across battlefields, there are thousands of commoners living in medieval squalor, kept ignorant and powerless, deliberately prevented from advancing or escaping or demanding better. This is the Imperium. Not the heroic propaganda, not the glorious battles, not the mighty defenders of humanity. This is the foundation it's built on. Billions of humans kept in chains, their suffering dismissed as necessary, their exploitation justified by the needs of those above them. This is the truth, and it will never change. Not for me, not for my sons, not for the millions of commoners on hundreds of night worlds across the Imperium. We are the forgotten, the exploited, the sacrificed. We are the price of knights, and no one with the power to change it ever will, because the system benefits them too much. This is my testimony, my truth, the reality of life as a commoner on a night world. Remember it, because we won't be remembered any other way. We will just die in these fields, generation after generation, serving lords who see us as livestock until the world ends, or we do. That's the horrifying truth about living on a night world as a commoner in Warhammer 40K. I am Aldrich. I am 35 years old. I have lived my entire life in chains I was taught to call traditions. I will die in these chains, so will my sons, and the lords will never care. Never notice, never acknowledge what they've done to us. Because we don't matter. We never have, we never will. We are property, forever. That's the truth. If this story changed how you see night worlds, share it. Others need to know this reality. Comment property if you see the horror clearly now.